Welcome back. I'm your host, Mr. B. We are discussing the latest developments in the Iran war. What should have only lasted 4 days is now going on to 40. And Trump is clearly showing his frustrations because he didn't anticipate that it would take this long. Now, things have escalated from attacking Iran and taking out all their military bases, Iran attacking all the Gulf states and Israel, and shooting down a few expensive U.S. ships and planes. Trump has retaliated. There's been people's facilities shot down, um, utility hubs shut down, oil hubs shot at and exploded, and things just continue to go out of hand. Then we get to a place where prices of oil is costing a lot because Iran um, essentially shut down the Strait of Hormuz. From that, there was a ceasefire after Trump could not force them to opening it up again. Now the ceasefire didn't go through, and Trump is now at the point where he is now creating a blockade to starve out Iran's economy. Now, this means he's going to cross paths with some of the major customers that Iran has, i.e., China, India, Russia. Those are the big nuclear armed powers whose economies are being affected the most by this blockade on Trump's side. So Trump is trying to have conversations to mediate the fallout. Now, this blockade means that any ship that goes through the strait would be stopped. And it appears as if China is not okay with that blockade and therefore has continued to send ships through the strait, of which creates a pressure point for Donald Trump. Fast forward, there's been news that Xi is funding or potentially providing support for Iran, whether by selling them weapons, giving them systems that they can use, defensive systems that they can use to mitigate the systems of the U.S. and Israel. And this has brought this all to a boiling point, at which point Trump and Xi are now exchanging letters to discuss where things go from there. That being said, we're going to jump into the story, the latest developments. Now, I'm citing First Post and Fair Use because they are a credible source that tends to get the stories right. They're Indian-based media publication that I think does a good job at bringing forth good information that is reliable. So let me go ahead and play the story.
Turning up the volume. Xi Jinping has already called it a return to the law of the jungle. But then comes Donald Trump with a completely different version of events. He says he's been personally exchanging letters with Xi. Yes, letters in the middle of a global crisis. And according to Trump, those letters had one clear ask. Do not arm Iran because earlier reports suggested China could step in militarily, tilting the balance of the war. And how did Xi reply? Well, Trump says he agreed to not do it.
I had heard that China's giving weapons to, you're seeing it all over the place, to Iran. And I wrote him a letter asking him not to do that. And he wrote me a letter saying that essentially he's not doing that.
Either Trump is very convincing, or we must take this with a pinch of salt or a bag of it. More importantly, China has not confirmed any of this. Beijing is yet to comment on Trump's latest claims, but we do have their statement on the blockade. Beijing has not only sharply criticized the US blockade, it has called it dangerous and irresponsible. It has warned that American actions could threaten global shipping and escalate an already fragile conflict. And the stakes for China are very real. Around 40% of its oil imports pass through the Strait of Hormuz. 90% of Iran's oil exports go to China. 45% of Iran's government budget is funded by China oil sales. And China receives $8 to $10 per barrel discount on Iranian crude. So any disruption there is not just a regional issue, it is a direct threat to China's energy security. This is why analysts say the US blockade was never just about Iran. It was also about pressuring China. If more proof is needed, look no further than Trump's actions in recent months. The Trump administration has already tried to deny China access to Venezuelan oil. Now it is trying to restrict China's access to Iranian oil. This is why analysts say this is not just an escalation against Iran, it is also an escalation targeting China. Beijing's dependence on the Gulf oil makes it particularly vulnerable to supply shocks. That's why on Tuesday, China's foreign ministry called the US move dangerous.
Under the ceasefire agreement reached by relevant parties, the U.S. increased military deployments and took a targeted blockade action, which will only exacerbate tensions and undermine the already fragile ceasefire agreement and further jeopardize safety of passage through the strait. This is dangerous and irresponsible behavior.
At the same time, China has been trying to project itself as a peacemaker. Trump himself suggested it. He said China helped get Iran to the negotiating table. Also, today, Beijing hosted world leaders in Beijing, calling for dialogue. In attendance were Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov, Spanish Prime Minister Pedro Sanchez, Abu Dhabi's Crown Prince Sheikh Khalid bin Mohammed bin Zayed Al Nahyan, and Vietnam's leader To Lam. All met Xi. Beijing is doubling down on diplomacy and trying to showcase a contrast with American foreign policy. But China is no altruistic actor. There have been multiple reports suggesting it has quietly supported Iran. One report claims Iran acquired a Chinese-built spy satellite in late 2024, which helped target US bases during the recent war. What's more, in recent months, Chinese naval activity in the region has reportedly expanded. Vessels operating from its base in Djibouti near the Bab al-Mandeb Strait have reportedly moved closer to the Gulf. In February, China reportedly deployed a powerful destroyer near the Gulf of Oman. Of course, China has denied all of these reports, calling the claims purely fabricated. But where does this leave us? The stakes of this conflict are only rising with the US blockade, and China, whether it wants it or not, could play a bigger role in the days to come. So is Donald Trump trying to lower the temperature before sitting across the table from Xi Jinping? Or is Beijing playing a longer game, saying just enough, while keeping its options open? We don't know which one it is. But this story isn't over yet. So what began as a US-Iran conflict could very well end as another US-China power play.
Okay, so I'm going to make a comment here, and I think it's important to point to bring this to light. It is blatantly obvious to anyone with eyes to see that Iran is not the only target that the U.S. has. Professor Jing had brought up some things that I think are very valid points. He had mentioned in his assessment of the situation that the U.S. is a superpower that's potentially fighting to keep its relevance. But because of its hubris, it is overplaying its hand, and it doesn't even see the effects that it's having in the global stage. The moment that the U.S. took out Maduro, because Maduro was partaking in a scheme to work around the U.S. Financial system, petrodollar system, I think it was evident that they were doing that not just because of Maduro, but they were doing that because they didn't want to have other superpowers like a China, like a Russia, or like an Iran have influence in their backyard. But the bigger influence that they didn't want to have is the influence of them undermining their financial system that allows them to put sanctions on countries anytime they feel they want to. So the US, through the fact that they control the financial system through their central banks globally, can decide that if a country is not acting in accordance to how it perceives it should be acting, they can add a sanction to them and mandate that other countries not transact with that country, or else they too will face penalties. So then in a way they start isolating countries like a China or like a Russia or like an Iran. Few of those countries are heavily sanctioned, thereby squeezing their economy so the US can do what they please. Because they've overplayed that hand, and the European Union has overplayed that hand, NATO has overplayed that hand, and applying sanctions on a Russia or on an Iran, it forced these folks to create a system around it. This is one of the reasons why BRICS came up. Because now they feel like without even being given a trial, a country that controls the system can apply sanctions to us, and we're forced to capitulate to whatever their demands are. That's the core problem that led to the Chinese and Maduro and Iran and Russia kind of working through Bitcoin or doing transactions to the yuan to work around the US system. When you overplay your hand in one aspect, people are going to start to find ways around it because they don't feel like it's just. That being said, once those countries attempted to go around it, now the US is trying to reassert its authority and essentially slap everyone on the hand for saying, you don't get to change the system, we still want to control it. So then they took military action to try to, suppress those actors that they deem are violating or creating viable alternative solutions to their money system. Iran is a major culprit, which is why it's under attack now. Maduro was a major culprit, which is why he was captured. And China, obviously a major consumer who probably had the idea and has been working around because they too have eyes to be the major superpower. They're competing, they're puffing their chests. They want to overtake the US's position as the number one influencer in the world. China is the ultimate culprit that the US is ultimately taking the actions to effect. Now, Trump does all the actions that he does, knowing that the real target is China, but he pretends as if they're good friends. So imagine you're meeting with someone who you believe is acting in good faith and who proclaims to be your friend. And in the process of doing that, they're doing everything in their power to undermine you, to ensure that your growth doesn't grow, to ensure that you don't succeed. And then they ask you not to take any measures to stop them from trying to hinder your growth. That would seem absurd to anybody with common sense. So in the last story that we just heard, that's exactly what's happening here. Trump, in a way, is taking all these measures against Iran. Now, China, I believe it's been reported that they get roughly 40% of their energy, if not more, from Iran. They were getting another significant percentage from Maduro. And Trump has attacked both of those supply lines. And he made a statement the other day where he said out loud, the US is open for business. You don't have to go buy from Iran. You can buy from us. Now, mind you, China's buying from Iran on a discounted system. It's much closer to where they're located than it is for them to come to our hemisphere to buy it. But also, they're discounting it because obviously Iran has to create an incentive for people to go around the US financial system to buy from them, as was the case with Russia when they were selling to India. India had the option to buy from Russia at a discounted price until Trump attached sanctions to them to curb the buying of Russian oil from the Indians, of which they capitulated to Trump's pressures. And then Russia, once the US got into this conflict, Russia then raised their prices because India wasn't that loyal. So that being said, I think it is in a way absurd that Trump in a way is having a conversation with China, asking them don't support their oil supplier whom they're consuming discounted oil on, who their economy of 1 billion plus people is highly affected by. Meaning, in order for China to continue to operate and not to crumble under the pressure, not to have economic hardship, they need to have a reliable source of energy. So Trump, in creating a blockade, wants the person that is hurting the most, i.e. China, to not do anything to hinder them from hurting them, if that makes sense. So Trump wants the US to continue to apply this pressure to Iran to get Iran to tap out. Meanwhile, they're starving Iran and Iran's customers, China. And then they're saying, well, I'm hearing you're providing support to Iran. Of course they're providing support to Iran. Of course. Like, you don't have to hear it. You almost know it. You know they're providing support to Iran, Trump. You know it. Of course they would. You would. If you were in their position, you would provide support to them. Why? Because the leadership in Iran has been in good working relationship with the leadership in China. Now, if the US succeeds at putting new leadership that they control in Iran, then that leadership is likely to be more hostile to China because the US is now dictating the terms for what China can get in terms of resources from them. And China already knows that the US is trying to curtail or slow down or delay the growth of the Chinese economy. So of course they don't want that, because they want to be able to continue to grow and to be seen as the next major superpower. Of course they're going to provide support to the enemy of the US. That's where they says the enemy of my enemy is my friend. Strategically, they cannot say out loud, yes, we're doing that. But you've just seen the lady in the story here just point out how China is already moving strategic assets from ships that they have based in Djibouti. It's being moved closer to the waters. Then they're communicating. Then they're sending, defense weapons, targeting weapons that is helping Iran know exactly where to strike. Somehow, some way, even though the U.S. said they've decimated all of Iran's military bases, they're still able to operate somehow, some way. That has to be possible because there's some other resources being provided to them that we're not accounting for. And this ultimately leads me back to why I, as a guy who supports Donald Trump and wanted to see him succeed in his second term, wanted him to steer clear of this type of policy, foreign policy. This is quicksand for any president. It was already one thing that Trump was attempting to stand up for the American people by renegotiating economic terms with other countries who he validly made a case were taking advantage of the US due to the trade imbalances. I supported that. But the moment he started doing that meant those countries would reluctantly comply, but they would secretly want to get their get back, if you will, at the US for the fact that now the US is not making things favorable for them anymore. So they were already kind of perturbed with the US. Now we're openly starting wars, and then we're asking them to participate in the wars they don't benefit from, that hurts their economy, that makes things more expensive for their people, that reduces their energy resources. And they're asking us to partake in the war that they don't agree with, that they don't benefit from, that literally only benefits one country. And then Trump is somehow upset that those countries don't want to partake. They don't want to participate. One, they don't want to be a target. Two, they also don't want to assist in their own destruction. These countries really and truly aren't really trying to see us win this conflict. They're actually rooting for Iran to win the conflict because they feel that in a way we overexerted our authority. And in a way, we're flexing and bullying smaller countries simply because we have a big military. And in a way, it's probably refreshing for them to see a country stand up to us in a way that humbles us. So naturally, it's leaving egg yolk on the face of the American leaders and on the face of the American people, which is an embarrassment. Now, I don't want to see our leaders embarrassed on the global stage. And I believe this is why Trump's true supporters were trying to get him to see this is not the path. It is not the path for you to pursue something that's going to make your power and influence and authority diminish on the world stage. And I think Trump may have been misled into believing that this operation was going to be seamless, that the Iranian people were going to overthrow their government, that that he was doing the world a favor. And the world is not viewing what Trump is doing as a favor to them. And I don't know that he's being told that. I don't know that he's so far deep because his pride is now involved in it that it's hard for him to see otherwise. But the Bible says pride comes before the fall. It's a moment where you feel so convicted in your way of thinking, which is an error, that you double down on it and you don't humble yourself and cut base from your original position. And this is why I, as a person who's just expressing my opinion, feel that Donald Trump should reverse course on this. Not because I want to see him fail, not because I want to see him diminished on the global stage, but because I actually care about the well-being of the American people, because I actually care about the legacy that's going to be left behind, and I care about the lives that is being lost and the effect from a cost standpoint that it will ultimately have on the American people. For the people who's already rich, who's already got money, they are having a hard time connecting to how hard this is affecting those who are not in their position, right? If you're a billionaire, you don't really care that much that gas went up $2 from $3 to $5, or from $4 to $6, or from $5 to $7. You care less. You have billions in the bank. You've already tapped in. You have different revenue flows that's constantly increasing your wealth on a daily basis. It doesn't even affect you. But for the people who voted and supported your party and who does not have access to the funds that you have, and who's essentially living on debt and scraping by, their degree of tolerance is far less than yours will be, because every day they got to figure out, how do I feed my kids, especially when things are more expensive, gas is more expensive, the job market isn't as great, and we're in a lot of debt as a country. How do I feed my kids? And eventually, it's not because people don't want to support you. They have to choose themselves over you. It's survival. You will support someone for as long as it makes sense for you to. The moment that you can't survive and it's either them or you, you're going to walk away. It's survival. And I don't believe that Trump has a proper grasp on that aspect of it. The people aren't traitors because they're saying, hey, Donald, you have billions of dollars that creates a buffer for you that you won't ever really feel the effects of this war like the folks who don't have billions of dollars. So while they were in there with you under the trenches, the moment they are stomach growling, they're losing their house. Their mortgage is upside down. They're going through divorces. Their children are being malnourished. There's disruption in their household, and their world is crumbling down, and the decisions you're making are not aiding them. They're going to choose themselves, and they're going to back away slowly. A lot of times reluctantly. They're backing away because they can't afford to stand under the umbrella with you. Which is why I believe Trump possibly feels very isolated in this moment, and he is now lashing out at all his quote unquote allies who have left him stranded. I understand it. I can understand where he's coming from. Betrayal is never a good thing, given all that we've done for NATO. And that's the next story that we'll end up going into. But I understand where Trump is coming from as far as that is concerned. Is that, you know, we're a part of a ally group that leaves us stranded when we need them, yet they expect us to do the majority of their fighting, to pay the majority of their bills when they need us. And for years, we have done just that. And in the one instance where we need them to step up in a major way, they view their self-interest above our need. It's a dog-eat-dog world. But I'm hoping that Trump eventually comes to the realization that this is a zero-sum game here. And I know it's hard. It's going to take courage for him to take a different position, but it's a zero-sum game. Even if he wins in Iran and they accomplish their goal and make Iran tap out, at what cost? Meaning, what will be the effect of the US's reputation with the rest of the world? Will this accelerate everyone else seeking out a nuclear weapon for their own protection, because this could happen to them any day? Will this make countries not want to do business with us? Will this accelerate countries seeking an alternative other than the US petrodollar system to do business in, which is happening as we speak? All of these things are actually undermining the US influence. And as a person who has been greatly blessed by this country, it's not a perfect country, but it's better than most. And what I would say is that I don't want that for this country. I want the country to succeed. And I think, it takes people really speaking out and telling the president that this is not the way. Now, I'm a whole Christian over here. So I believe that prayer changes things, because the Bible says God holds the heart of the king in his hands. I believe that we have authority to pray that the circumstances change. I believe that we have been empowered to pray for our leaders, because they're not perfect people. They're, humans just like us, and they're making decisions under immense pressure. So I don't even pretend to think that Donald Trump's position is easy. I don't even pretend to think that I would want to be in his position because these are the type of things that keep you up at night. Like, this guy's got to worry about what happens in his country domestically, and as well as leading the rest of the world, being there for other countries and allies that call upon him to do it. And he's got to always make the decision. It's a lot. So I don't think it's easy. I think there needs to be some grace applied to the man, just in the same way that we've applied other leaders in the past. We've given them some grace. I think we as a population should do that as well. The only thing I'm saying is that, people oftentimes have expiration dates on their grace. And I think for the most part, the American people have given Donald Trump some grace. I mean, he got reelected because we believed that the plan against him didn't work, and it was only meant to stain him, and the people stood behind him and supported him. And I think there's a lot of disappointing folks, supporters, who feels like, Donald Trump is not necessarily extending the same grace to them that they are extending to him. But again, nothing is perfect. We got to pray for people. People are imperfect. And I think what you're seeing is that a lot of this pressure is having an effect on the president. And he's too proud of a man to say it. He always has to project. He knows what he's doing. His way is the right way. He has always got to project that. But I think you can see, just by some of the actions that he's taking, he's lashing out at allies. He's frustrated, and he's cussing on social media and doing things. And this guy is a very well-spoken guy. I mean, if you ever watch his old Charlie Rose interviews from back in the days, this dude knows how to talk. He's accomplished what he's accomplished because he knows how to work the room. He knows how to negotiate and do these things. And whenever he starts unraveling in that way, that's not, to me, that's not like him. He's always owning the moment. And when he's getting out of line, I mean, I saw something posted recently of him projecting himself to be Jesus or something like that. And then when they asked him about it, he said he was just trying to be a health worker. And I just thought to myself, damn, like, people are seeing you fabricate stories, bro. It probably was a poor choice for him to post what he posted. I mean, he since corrected the statement and took it down, so kudos to that. But it's to me, it's a bit of a cry for help, in my view. He wants people to like him. He wants them to believe that he is their leader who has their interest in mind. And I think at his core, he probably has a heart like that. But like any of us, we also have sides of us that, is misunderstood, that is not as polished, right? And sometimes you see that, right, under immense pressure. And I think that's what's happening with Donald Trump. Now, there's another story here that I kind of want to get to. And I think it speaks to Trump's NATO position and whether or not he will continue in the NATO alliance. So let's jump right into that story.
He done this before? Well, the answer is yes. But this time, he is particularly mad at the military alliance. As you know, the United States went to war with Iran. Trump thought it would be a 3-day affair. Now it's dragging on for over 40 days. And in the middle of this, Trump needed reinforcements to open the Strait of Hormuz. So he asked NATO. They said no. And since then, Trump has been sulking. He called European leaders cowards. He called NATO a paper tiger. He said he was very disappointed in the military alliance.
We spend hundreds of billions of dollars a year on NATO, hundreds protecting them. And we would have always been there for them. But now, based on their actions, I guess we don't have to be, do we? All I want to see is I want to have a safe world. And you're not going to have a safe world. Israel will be gone. The Middle East will be gone. And then they're coming for Europe. And I have to tell you, I'm very disappointed in NATO. And now all we do is we'll open up the strait, even though we don't use it, because we have a lot of other countries in the world that do use it that are either afraid or weak or cheap. I don't know what it is, but we were not helped by NATO, that I can tell you.
You get the idea. Things got so bad that the NATO chief had to hop on to a plane. I'm talking about NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte. He flew to Washington personally to calm him down. They met, they talked, and NATO chief even called it candid.
So it was a good conversation. It was open and candid. And I clearly felt his disappointment, which, again, to a certain extent, I understand.
Mark Rutte is trying to be his diplomatic best, but even that did not help. Trump fired off yet another Truth Social post, saying NATO wasn't there when we needed them, and now he seems adamant to pull out of the alliance.
You know, we spend trillions of dollars on NATO to help them guard really against Russia. When you think of it, we're guarding against Russia. And I've long thought it was a little ridiculous, but we spend trillions of dollars doing it. And I think that's going to be under very serious examination.
Now, frankly, none of this is new. Trump has been saying for years that America is getting played. The deal inside NATO was always this: every member spends at least 2% of their GDP on defense. For decades, most Europeans didn't bother, but they knew America would foot the bill. But Trump pushed back. He actually got them to agree to 5% of GDP by 2035. And then there was the Iran war. Trump wanted NATO to join in. He wanted them to help open the Strait of Hormuz. Europe did not agree. And that did not sit well with Donald Trump. Now, it's not like this is a first. Europe has defied America inside NATO before. France and Germany refused to back the Iraq war in 2003. France and Spain denied America overflight rights during the 1986 Libya strikes. NATO has had massive internal fights, and it survived every single one. But this is Donald Trump that we're talking about. Can he really walk out of NATO? Here's the catch. In 2023, the US Congress passed a law specifically blocking any president from withdrawing from NATO without congressional approval. So legally, Trump is stuck, but he doesn't need to formally leave to break the alliance. He can pull troops out of Europe. He can cut intelligence sharing. He can make clear that if a NATO member is attacked, America will not show up. Basically, he can hollow out an institution from the inside without ever signing a piece of paper. And that is exactly what European leaders are afraid of. So Europe is doing something extraordinary, something that it has never seriously done before. It is building a plan to run NATO without America. Officials are quietly calling it European NATO. The idea itself is simple. Take NATO's existing military architecture, its command structure, its bases, its logistics networks, and shift control to European hands. Officials are also looking to expand Europe's defense production. Germany has backed the plan, and then there's France. France is the only European country with nuclear weapons. And there is talk about extending the French nuclear umbrella to the whole of the bloc. So, what happens now? NATO isn't dead yet. The real question isn't whether Trump will pull out of NATO. The real question is, does it matter anymore if he stays? Because an alliance runs on trust, and trust, once broken, doesn't come back with a Truth Social post. So, is Donald Trump mentally fit?
Before we tackle that question, whether or not Donald Trump is mentally fit, we sort of comment on the NATO alliance. It's likely that Trump is going to take measures against NATO, but NATO probably feels in their own right that maybe, the moment Trump started this war, Russia has gotten richer from it, which they're actively engaged in a fight right now with Ukraine. And that doesn't help NATO's position. So, these people got a lot of little hostilities. And also, NATO wanted Trump's attention and his resources allocated towards their war, not towards Israel's war. So it's almost like the U.S. got children and we favoritize one child over the other. You know what I mean? One dependent over the other, right? Israel depends on us to back them. NATO depends on us to back them. They both have their conflicts with whoever it is that they don't like in their region. And they're both coming hands out, asking for our help. And Trump pivoted away from helping NATO with the Russia conflict towards helping Israel with the Iran conflict. And so there's a part of them that don't want to see Trump succeed. That's why none of them are rushing to help him, right? Politically, it doesn't make sense for them. But it also says something that in reality, the U.S. is just, pardon my French, they're just the ones that gets taken advantage of. And Trump is right in that assessment, and we're not just getting taken advantage of by NATO. A lot of our allies are taking advantage of us, right? They are leading us into conflicts that we shouldn't be led into. And as a result, we are overstretching ourselves, neglecting our own problems at home to engage in other people's problems. That's like leaving your house to take care of what's going on in your neighbor's house from across the street and not even paying attention to all the internal issues that you have in your house. But that's what we have here. Now, with regards to whether or not Trump is mentally fit, let's see what they got to say about that.
That question has haunted him before. But now, amid threats to wipe out Iran and public attacks on the Pope, the debate has returned. Critics point to a pattern: erratic behavior, disjointed speech, and increasingly extreme rhetoric. Of course, the White House has dismissed it all, insisting the president is sharp and deliberately unpredictable. But the timing is critical. The United States is navigating a major international crisis, and questions about presidential stability are no longer abstract. Ironically, Trump rose to power in part by arguing that his predecessor, Joe Biden, was unfit to lead. Historically, presidential fitness has been debated before. Abraham Lincoln fought depression, Woodrow Wilson was weakened by a stroke, and Lyndon B. Johnson faced questions over volatility. Now the scrutiny is on Trump. Concern is real. recent polls age, only 45% see him as mentally sharp, and 79-year-old Trump is too old for the job. Democrats have renewed calls to invoke the 25th Amendment. It allows the vice president and a majority of the cabinet or a body designated by Congress to declare the president unfit, transferring powers to the vice president immediately.
I think it's very clear that Donald Trump is not fit to serve as president and commander in chief of the United States at this point. And I have called for the use of every possible tool to remove Trump from his position, whether that's the invocation of the 25th Amendment, which would require the cabinet acting, impeachment, which would require Congress to act. And we are planning to put another war resolution on the House floor as soon as we're able to vote to end the war.
But the criticism is no longer partisan. Voices on the right, including former allies, are now raising similar concerns. Republican Representative Marjorie Taylor Greene called his rhetoric on Iran insanity. Far-right commentator Candace Owens labeled him a genocidal lunatic. Trump, in return, has, of course, hit back, dismissing his critics as low IQ, stupid, and nut jobs. But here's the thing about Trump. This unfiltered style is exactly what built his political brand. For years, supporters have seen him as a straight shooter, a leader who says what others won't. His provocations dominate headlines and keep him at the center of the conversation. But now, even some of those supporters are beginning to hesitate. In his second term, critics say Trump appears less restrained, more rambling, drifting into odd tangents, and often prioritizing personal fixations over policy clarity. Be it an 8-minute ramble at a Christmas reception about poisonous snakes in Peru, or a long digression during a cabinet meeting about Sharpie pens, or an interruption of an Iran war update to praise the White House drapes. But Trump supporters argue that what critics call erratic is actually deliberate. They point to his first term, when his unpredictable style kept adversaries off balance and forced allies to move faster. Take, for example, his direct engagement with Kim Jong-un, including the first ever meeting between a sitting US president and a North Korean leader, a breakthrough after years of diplomatic stalemate. The Abraham Accords, which normalized relations between Israel and several Arab states. More recently, in the second term, Trump brokered the Gaza ceasefire and hostage exchange. For his base, Trump's style is not a liability, it's a strategy. In a political system, they see as rigid and slow. The disruption is exactly the point. Because Trump is not your garden variety leader. He can be as brazen as brass. But that is precisely why his supporters like him. Unlike career politicians, he is not constrained by political correctness. There is no template thinking. And while those questioning his mental acuity might believe that he is like an elephant walking around with his own china shop, for a significant support base, what you see is what you get, which is political soap opera.
To weigh in on this particular topic, when we're talking about Trump's mental fitness, this is not even a conversation that I think we need to be having. If you're comparing Trump's mental fitness to Joe Biden's mental fitness, this is night and day here. You may not agree with Trump's decisions on certain policies, but in terms of him being mentally sharp, I think without a question, he's mentally sharp. Now, there's people who are his critics that are angry that he doesn't agree with their point of view, or that he's pivoted from something he said he would do in the past. And therefore, now they're trying to undermine him by saying he's not fit for office, simply because they lost their positions because Trump, parted ways from them. But in terms of his mental fitness, it's night and day if you're comparing him to Joe Biden. I mean, Joe Biden couldn't utter a sentence. The guy was falling asleep. He couldn't walk down the stairs. He couldn't walk straight. He was wandering off into God knows where that man was going, right? And he wouldn't do an interview. He was not sharp. He was not there. I mean, that's just the result of old age. This isn't an attack on Joe Biden, but he's an old man who became senile at one point, who was not sharp. And everyone was trying to tell you, don't believe your eyes. The fact that he's sleeping or wandering off or falling down the stairs is just proof that he's just as sharp as ever. No, we can't compare Trump on that level to a Joe Biden in terms of mental fitness. Now, Trump is frustrated, and because he's frustrated, he is trying to deflect conversations away from the things that's frustrating him. So he does this thing called the weave, when he is essentially discussing something and he'll tell another story unconnected and then come right back to whatever the story is. But that has been his style of controlling the audience that he's talking to. He does it at his rallies, and it's the way that he can have a 2-3 hour rally in front of 10,000+ people and still keep their attention and keep them attentive and keep them coming back. That's just stylistically who he is. And so a lot of people see him, weaving as part of what he does. But in terms of his sharpness, I don't think there's a comparison between him and Joe Biden. That's not it. So when I saw the Democrat representative there saying that she's initiating things to impeach Trump, I mean, they would have initiated things to impeach Trump anyway. They don't like him. They were trying to imprison the guy. They're not fans. So naturally, his critics will do anything to undermine him and to say he's not sharp and all these different things. But I don't think that's what it is. There are people who disagree with Donald Trump because they felt maybe he did not stick behind his word in following through with certain things related to the Epstein files or certain things related to not starting new wars. They disagree that he pivoted and went in a different direction. To me, that's not a man who is not mentally fit. That's just a man who changed his mind on something. That's not a guy who's falling down or is on vacation half the time, never does an interview, sleeping during meetings, like can't utter a straight sentence and is clearly not there. Like, all you have to do is watch a few Joe Biden highlights and there's no comparison there. So I think that criticism of Donald Trump is unmerited and unfair. Now, you can criticize that he's done some things that people don't agree with. And, I being a person who's, supported some things, I don't agree with his foreign policy things right now pertaining to starting a war in Iran or what he did with Maduro. I'm not a big fan of that. That's personally me. But if we're analyzing 10 things that the man's done, I'd say probably 7 out of the 10 I kind of support from a position standpoint. So, yeah, I don't agree with everything he's done. And for the things I don't agree about, I have come out and said I don't really believe that this is the direction we should be going. And I've spoke up against it. And I think naturally, the majority of the people who have defected from supporting him still 9 times out of 10 would support him over whoever his opposition is, because 9 times out of 10 on policy, they probably agree with him more than they disagree with him. So to now just label the guy unfit simply because there's policies that you disagree with him on, I don't think is fair. So I'm not going to stand on that one. So that being said, that wraps up our latest updates for what's been going on with the Iran war. It does seem that the pressure is affecting not just the economy globally, but also the president, because now he's getting into tweet battles with the Pope, and he just feels everyone's against him because everyone can see this for what it is. We don't want to be at war. Like, this is written on he knew that this backlash was going to come. So Donald Trump should not be surprised when the Pope says something about not wanting to be at war. Now, I can understand him saying the Pope should have probably said something when Joe Biden was supporting the Ukraine war with Russia as well. Be consistent. I could see that. That way he would have been consistent across the board. So maybe he felt, the Pope is weighing in on this, but didn't weigh in on the Joe Biden thing. Might be a legitimate point of view, but the point is, no one wants this war, bro. We gotta find our way out of it immediately before things get worse. And that's just what it is. But I do think he's fit. I don't think his cabinet should take over. I don't want JD Vance to take over for Donald Trump. I don't want that. Nobody voted for JD Vance to come into power. We want Donald Trump to go back to the no on war policy he had before. We want him to take a step back. It's okay, bro. You stepped into the water. You weren't ready for what that water had for you. Come the heck back. You ain't going to lose nothing. You still going to be the same person. You're still going to be loved. You're still going to be, people are still going to support you. But we're not supporting you when you outside doing something that's going to kill your own legacy. You know what I mean? So to me, it's in his interest to dead the whole thing and come back to what he ran on, which is a no war policy. And it continue to prioritize the needs of his domestic residents rather than the needs of outsiders who's petitioning for us to get involved in stuff that don't involve us. All right, that's my take. It's been a long day. We are just about at the hour mark. I thank you guys for joining me. I ask that you like and subscribe to the channel, and you just stay connected. Join the conversation, weigh in on the conversation, and just stay connected. Until we speak again, God bless you. Be well.